This is Free Media, Free Minds with me, your host Chelsea Noah Ogilvy on Cape Town TV. So in a little bit we'll hear from people from all across Africa giving us some exclusive insight into how things go down on the rest of the African continent. We are speaking internet shutdowns in Africa and the disparities of access to the internet for women. So we'll be speaking about a life of no Facebook, no Twitter, no WhatsApp, and this is becoming increasingly common all across Africa. So we'll have a look at why governments are shutting down the internet for political purposes and shutting down social media platforms as well. So joining us for this conversation is Sigi Mwanzia, who's a digital policy fellow at Article 19 for Eastern Africa, as well as Hajuj Kaku, who is a Sudanese revolutionary. But for now, let's have a look at this insert to give us some context for this conversation.
Uganda suffered a dual internet shutdown in 2016 during elections. One happened during the eve of election, of the general elections in February, and then the second one happened in March during the inauguration of the president, the elected president, who is also the incumbent. So as a Ugandan, the internet shutdown took me by surprise. Like many Ugandans, we didn't expect it. And then all of a sudden, there was no connection to different social media platforms. This means that there was limited information flow, or not at all, because in some places you could hardly get information about the elections, or even connecting to loved ones. There's so many people who had to travel, because mobile money was also disconnected in the process. Mobile money services also affected us, me inclusive. So you couldn't transfer money to loved ones. Even for emergencies, money could not be transferred because of the mobile money disconnection. And then because our work as an unwanted witness basically thrives on the internet, and also communicating on social media is very key for us. So we were affected as an organization, and so many other organizations were affected as well. And that's why, as an unwanted witness, we decided to take on government and telecom companies to court to challenge this practice, because there were no guidelines regarding the shutdown. Nobody knew it would happen, and it was very instant, affecting thousands and thousands of lives. And so that's why we went to court.
So now that we have some context on this conversation, we are now going to hear from Hajuj Kaku, who is a Sudanese revolutionary on this topic. Check it out. All right, we are speaking to Hajuj Kuka, joining us all the way out of Sudan on what looks like a quite sunny afternoon. And he is an activist and filmmaker, joining us on a discussion on on internet shutdowns in Africa and how that has related politically. Thank you. Okay, look, I'm going to do my intro again. Take 2. 4, 3, 2. We are speaking to Hajuj Kuka, joining us all the way out of Sudan, and he is an activist and filmmaker, joining us for our discussion on internet shutdowns in Africa for political purposes. First of all, Sudan looks absolutely and it looks like the sun is shining today. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us, and tell us a little bit about Sudan today specifically.
I'm doing good. Sudan today, I mean, we're in this stage that we're after our big revolution, but we're still going on the waves of the revolution, and things are good. We have more freedoms than before. Politically, the situation is still not totally stable. But we're excited. We feel like we have more say in what happens in our country than before, and we have a way more freedoms than we had before. So it's a good time to be in Sudan.
Fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
So I'm a political, social, active filmmaker. I make films about the situation in Sudan mainly. I have two major films. One is called Beats of the Antelope, talking about the Sudanese identity, the war, and music, and how all that relates together. And then I have a fictional film also shot in the war zone of Sudan and also dealing with revolutions and what happens when you're in this prolonged state of revolution. And most of my other work is just being an activist on the ground and trying to organize and working with a lot of amazing people trying to have change in the country that was for 30 years ruled by a dictator, a military Islamic dictator in Sudan that we got rid of in April.
All right, fantastic. So let's start our conversation at looking at access to the internet across Africa. How does access to the internet across Africa look at the moment when there aren't any shutdowns?
So mainly what I use is my phone, and mainly I use social media. So most of my internet use is WhatsApp. That's like 80% of my internet use. That's how I communicate with other people. That's how I get my news. That's how I talk, send pictures, laugh, do everything. So that's mainly what I use. And for that, the internet in Sudan is actually pretty good. Having connections through the internet is the majority of, like I'll say 90% of the people in Sudan use the internet through their phones. And then other than that, you have the normal social media and once in a while some websites, some other stuff. But that's majorly my use. And that's majorly like everybody's in it. Like the young are in it, the youth are in it, my mother is in it, grandparents are in it. Everybody is online. And because we have a large number of people living in the diaspora because of the wars and whatnot, then that's how they normally communicate inside using these different communication methods.
All right, so Hajish, when the internet isn't working, whether it's a shutdown or load shedding or you didn't pay your Wi-Fi that month, whatever the situation is, what happens to your campaigns and your movements when you don't have social medias at all?
So first, let's talk about campaigning using the internet.
Yeah.
So what happened was in Sudan, the media is and still is up to this point controlled by the government. So the traditional media, be it the TV, the radio, newspapers, all that is controlled by the government. So all that you just hear their propaganda, and that's how they use it as a propaganda method. So what happened with the use of internet and social media and whatnot, people found an outlet to actually tell their own story. So now a lot of people started believing social media I mean, there's problems with that, but believing social media way more than the Sudanese or the government sources. And the other thing about these using WhatsApp and using all these other methods is that you can easily organize. So you can quickly organize. Yes. You can be dysfunctional as a movement, but still in the last minute be able to get out a protest with a lot of people, put it on live feeds on the internet and all that. So it was actually super important from organizing, realizing when we're going to come out, what are the times, what are we doing, discussing it, having meetings that are online, so it's not as there's no security risks of being caught or whatnot in a big group in a meeting, and then actually putting the word out, like during the protest, having live feeds and all that. So it's actually been super essential in the way we're operating as a community of resistance. So when internet cuts, suddenly you lose this ability to organize in a secretive, safe haven, and then you'll have to like actually meet each other, send text messages, call on the phone, which is very risky because all that is you can easily get caught. And that's what happened in Sudan when internet was cut. It's just like we were suddenly faced with, wow, we gotta like organize on the ground and we gotta meet and we have to take big risks.
And I think that kind of speaks to the power that social media has, especially in organizing, compared to traditional media. I mean, I feel like it would be a lot more difficult to organize and to get the troops together and to rally the troops using TV or radio or newspapers. But if we look on a more global scale, we saw internet shutdowns in 2016, and 11 out of the 56 of the global internet shutdowns happened in Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about the global shutdowns and exactly what would motivate a global shutdown of this magnitude?
Okay, so first let's talk about what happened in Sudan in June.
Yeah.
So in June 3rd, we had a sit-in that was going on for over 50 days, and it was a strong sit-in, and the protesters were becoming bigger in number. We're organizing. Everybody was out there. Like at night, you'll have like 100,000 people on a normal day. So it was like amazing, and it was huge, and they were asking for real change. And then the government, the military, militia, led by somebody called Hemeti, they decided they're gonna remove the sit-in, and by doing that, they can just take over the country. So they actually had a massacre, and it happened on June 3rd. It started early in the morning, started like 5 a.m., and they actually killed about 150 people. There was like 70 rapes. There were houses burned, and a lot of it was live on Facebook. And they didn't realize until 2 p.m. we had an internet shutdown that lasted 5 weeks.
Wow.
And through that time, they thought they can control the country, use the traditional media, and that we're not going to be able to organize. It did take us some time, and then the biggest protest ever in Sudanese history happened on June 30th. And we all came back. And to organize that, we had to use just cell phones and meetings and all that, and we couldn't like have live feeds and whatnot. So it was very hard for us to organize, but it was actually amazing that we were able to do it, and we were actually stronger than any time before because it was face-to-face organizing. So that was one important thing. But it is effective. Like cutting the internet, there was a few days where we didn't know what really happened. Not everybody heard about because we're not online. We don't really know the news of what happened during the massacre unless you were there or you had seen it before 2 p.m. A lot of people did, but we had to share it and whatnot. And we didn't see all the videos. I mean, we didn't see some of the most gruesome videos. I didn't see it myself until after internet was back 5 weeks later. So it's a very effective method in making a blackout and just making the whole country not realizing what was happening, being disconnected, not being able to organize, and then you can actually feed the country your lies and whatnot because there's not a lot of alternative methods, especially that we rely so much on the internet.
Yeah.
So that happened in Sudan, and right after I heard there was a shutdown in Iran, there's a shutdown. So all these countries that feel that they can control the internet and they can control their people because once the internet is out, then you can say you can tell them whatever story you want to make up.
All right, so Hajjuj, before we go to an ad break, can you quickly tell us why we see this most commonly in African governments and why it hasn't been considered illegal and unconstitutional? Because really it is an infringement on the right to access to information.
Well, it's actually strange. In Sudan, if you actually go to the laws, a lot of African countries have good constitutions and good laws. Yeah. And actually, there's one guy who, through the protest, through the shutdown in Sudan, he went to court and actually won his personal internet back.
Fantastic.
So from that end, yeah, actually, it's really hard because like he paid for it and whatnot. So he managed to actually get his internet back. So I think it's not about the constitutions or legality or not. It's about the ability to do it. And they actually, when they do it, it's always under the thing of this is national security, this is a threat, this is in state of emergency. So it's not the normal.
All right, we'll speak more about that when we come back from the break. We are speaking to Hajjuj Kuka on internet shutdowns in Africa for political purposes. Ad break real quick and we'll see you again. We'll continue our conversation with him after the break. We're speaking to Hajjuj Kaku, a Sudanese revolutionary, on internet shutdowns in Africa. But right about now, we do need to take an ad break to pay the bills, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with him. Welcome back from the ad break. We are speaking to Hajjuj Kaku, a revolutionary out of Sudan, and we are speaking about internet shutdowns for political purposes in Africa. Let's hear from him. And before the break, we got a little bit into the types of justifications that citizens are given when a shutdown does occur. So Hajjuj, can you maybe list a few justifications that citizens might be given from government when they do shut down the internet?
Well, the biggest thing is state of emergency.
Yeah.
There's like the outside media is trying to control. There's these countries that are trying to control us. Um, it's just agendas from outside. I mean, that's what's normally being said. And then there's like all these activists are trying to destroy the country. I mean, that's what they normally say. And for the example in Sudan, they were trying to say that the people in the sit-in, the activists, they were in the sit-in living, and they were using drugs and sex and stuff, and it was a bad place, and we were trying to clean up this area, and that's why we removed it. And now we don't want all the lies that come, so we're going to stop it, so there's not going to be lies coming out to divide the nation. So that's what they told the people.
All right, so if we bring the cause back closer to home for you, can you tell us a little bit about the internet, or rather what is your cause and what is happening in Sudan, and what exactly, essentially just elaborating on the work that you do?
So basically in Sudan, we had a dictatorship for years, and through that 30 years of no freedoms, corruption, one political party just deciding what they want to do. So, and we couldn't really create what we wanted to create. I mean, for me personally, I'm a filmmaker, so I just wanted to have the space to go around and tell the stories I wanted to tell and be truthful. And that wasn't really allowed. Like anything from women's rights, so I can't even get a woman to be on TV if she's not dressed in consider like a good way, and you couldn't talk about a lot of topics, and so it was hard to create, and it's hard to be real about it. But also, it's your daily life, like it's the way you dress. If you have hair, like police would stop me and want to cut my hair.
Wow.
Harass me. I mean, harassment is just such a normal daily life, like men and women, and they were controlling your ethics and stuff. So a lot of my work got stuck where, okay, for me to go forward, this needs to go. Like this government needs to go. We need freedoms. We need, and it wasn't until the economy also collapsed that then we became millions. It suddenly became everybody wanted change. And it was just a minority that were trying to keep the government down. And that's when the protest started in December, and we were able to go all the way until now. We have a prime minister who's trying his thing, man. He's a civilian.
Yeah, so if we look at a post-internet shutdown country or world, what kinds of user behavior or change in user behavior do we see? Is there any kind of self-censorship in any way?
Well, for us, when we had internet cut for 5 weeks and we were becoming more social, we were like going out more, talking on the phone. I normally never talk on the phone. I leave messages or text.
Yeah.
And then now I'm like, okay, talking, going out, and we're like meeting more and like in real life. And then internet got back. And then suddenly there was a few days we were just looking at our phones. And we were actually, for us, it was some depressing days. Because for the first time, we were seeing all the pictures of what happened and videos during the massacre. And a lot came out. Some people who had not uploaded their videos uploaded them. Some videos that we just didn't see because we didn't have time. I mean, I was beaten up. So by the time I went to the hospital and I was okay, and then 2 days later that I was actually physically okay to check anything, my internet was out. So I didn't really check these things. So it was like a few days of like just being crazy. And then just getting that shock, getting another depression, but and then just reacting. So there was a lot of more communication. And right now, I feel like Sudan is way more connected, and we're way more connected to the internet, to Twitter, to Facebook. We whenever the smallest little thing happens, we all know about it. It's way easier to tell folks, hey, there's a party in this place, and it'll be full. So people are way more networked now than before. And I'm not sure what happened, but I think we're all together back at the same time on the net, and we communicated, and everything just blows up. So now we actually are way more connected as a nation.
Yeah. So if we look at a post internet shutdown situation, and we look at the economics of it, what is the economic impact of an internet shutdown?
Okay, so this was very important because although Sudan, we had an internet shutdown that came from the army, we noticed that there's somebody who's online, because what happened was some of their businesses would be affected. So they allowed some back doors for themselves to operate. Like the banks needed them. People who worked in the telecommunication company still had like one or two lines that were open. In the beginning, they allowed the special business internet that is like DSL, which almost nobody had, but like a DSL was allowed, was not shut down. So we were like going trying to find out where we can get DSL. Later on in the last 2 weeks, it was cut also. But in the beginning, we were slowly discovering that, oh no, there's some stuff open. And then in the beginning, they allowed SIM cards that were international because it would be like businessmen who came from outside, and they allowed them to have internet. So we started noticing that happened. And that tells you how important it is. Even for them, economically, it was devastating that they could not actually shut down everything. So there's always these back doors that were open. And the other thing is, when we were organizing and we are trying to find places to organize, we ended up in this software production company. They just stopped working because internet was out, and they couldn't work for all that period. And even when internet became slowly back, they still couldn't operate because they created apps, so they depended on a lot of people using them. So over that 5 weeks, they totally shut down, and they totally lost a lot of their money. And so it was actually, suddenly you realize how much of the population actually depends on the internet. Even in Sudan, where we thought we're not that developed, but actually almost every adult, every person 15 years and over is online to a certain extent. So it was actually a huge deal that the internet was out economically.
All right, so if we look at internet shutdowns of such a massive magnitude across an entire continent, how do actually, I mean, maybe you could speak to your own local Sudanese experience, and then if you could speak on the entire African context, if you could. How does the internet shutdown affect our contribution as a continent or as a country to the fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with what happened in Sudan and in a lot of other African countries that are lesser developed, is that we actually jumped. So we never had a wired line in our house. We just suddenly had cell phones, and a lot of the youth around me, they don't really use email. They're not on they just like jumped into Facebook, into social media. And so, but they're really connected. Like they're creating content for online. They're programming. They're creating small videos. They're creating pictures. They're taking they have access because a cell phone can just do so much. So you have a lot of youth who normally wouldn't have access to create, so they're creating. Although a lot of it is not paid right now, but there's that excitement of creating content, of programming, of doing all this that is very accessible and doesn't require a lot of tools. So because of the way the internet is, because of the way it's given us platforms, you can create a video and put it on YouTube. You can make your own music video and put it up. You don't have to wait for somebody's permission to do anything. And because of that, there's a lot of people who are creating, who are excited, who are sharing, and who are learning online. Like you can basically become a filmmaker by learning online and having all these communities, and people are so excited about connecting. So I feel like it's very essential for us, and I feel like the moment we can tap into the internet, the moment we can communicate, the moment we can get into these communities, we can actually contribute a lot and and we have a lot of free time. I mean, one thing about being in a country where 50% unemployment is we have a lot of time. So by being connected and by being able to create things that look and sound so different than the status quo of the United States or New York or whatever, I can give you something that looks completely different. That's kind of cool because it's different. And I can do it because now creation and all that is accessible. It's just knowledge, and the knowledge is out there. I just need to go seek it.
All right, we have run out of time, Hajj, and we need to get to an ad break. Do you have any final comments on your specific Sudanese context on internet shutdowns and internet shutdowns in Africa?
No, that's it. I'm just think we should always fight for the freedom of the net, for staying connected, and not to be controlled. Internet is an amazing place, and the most important thing about it is it's not controlled by anybody. It's there. It's chaotic. It's decentralized, and we have to keep it that way.
All right, thank you so much for chatting to us, Hajouj, on internet shutdowns in Africa for political purposes and the disparities of access to the internet for women. Hajouj joining us all the way out of Sudan. Thank you so much. That was Hajouj Kaku speaking to us on internet shutdowns in Africa for political purposes, as well as the disparities of access to the internet for women. So right about now, we are going to take an ad break, and when we come back, we chat to Sigi Mwanzia, joining us all the way out of Kenya. Welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Free Media, Free Minds, and tonight we are discussing internet shutdowns in Africa and the disparities of access to the internet for women. So in a little bit, we'll speak to Sigi Mwanzia, all the way out of Kenya, and she is a digital policy fellow at Article 19 for Eastern Africa.
Hello, my name is Sigi, and I am a digital policy fellow at Article 19 Eastern Africa, which is a non-governmental organization that deals with freedom of expression and access to information in 14 Eastern African countries. I am also a fellow of the recently concluded African School on Internet Governance, and I would highly encourage everyone who's watching this show to please go onto the website for the Association for Progressive Communications and immerse yourself if you're interested in the internet governance discussions, as well as apply for the school next year. So just to dive into the interview material, so the first question was that the internet has truly changed how we communicate, and then goes on to ask how many on the African continent have internet access. Now, I think it's important to note that the internet has not just changed how we communicate, it has revolutionized how we communicate, the pace at which information is transmitted, as well as hastened the pace of globalization at an unprecedented scale. Notably, the internet was designed to enable the free flow of information and also enable individuals to express themselves. However, what digital rights proponents are noting is that both authoritarian and democratic states are putting in place technical measures to restrict access to content, which for us is a very worrying trend and should be a very worrying trend for citizens worldwide. Now, this worry comes in the backdrop of the fact that we're celebrating the internet's 50th birthday, and the celebrations took place on the 29th of October 2019. And essentially what started off as a military academic project, the United States has now turned into a transnational resource, which is essentially underpinned by principles of openness, as well as interoperability. Now, I think it's very crucial to note that everybody has a core role to play in ensuring that this transnational resource is protected in order to advance, not only to advance our own rights to freely express ourselves, to access information online, to transact, as well as to generate knowledge-driven digital value chains which pay homage to the tenets of digital inclusion for all. Regarding internet access in the region, I think it's very important first to ask ourselves, why is it important for individuals to have internet access? Now, the way I see it is that governments have a responsibility to advance their citizens' rights, as well as to progressively realize their sustainable development goals, as well as the AU's Agenda 2063, which is underpinned by the goal of transforming Africa into a future
We are chatting to Sigi Mwanzia, joining us all the way out of Kenya. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with her. Welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Free Media, Free Minds. And just before the ad break, we were chatting to Sigi Mwanzia. So let's continue our conversation with her. Was Sigi Mwanzia, joining us out of Kenya, and she is a digital policy fellow at Article 19 for Eastern Africa. So right about now, we are going to have a look at our community notice board for this week. That was our community notice board for this week. So thank you to my guests for joining us in this conversation on internet shutdowns in Africa for political purposes and the disparities of access to the internet for women. So thanks to Sigi Mwanzia for joining us all the way out of Kenya, and Hajuj Kaku joining us all the way out of Sudan on this topic. From me, Chelsea Noah Ogilvie, good night, keep it real, and if it's unreal, keep it anyway.